Profile. Share via email. Report story. By underrated hero. Chapter 1 Once and for all. SMAAASH. The thundering echo of the collision resulted in a sonic boom, sending shockwaves in the air. The clouds around them vanished, and hundreds of yards beneath them, the ground shook with the force of the impact. The remaining pillars that hadn't been destroyed throughout the battle finally collapsed, joining the debris of what once stood proud as the main building of UA High School. Floating in the air, with his hero's suit shredded to pieces, his whole body covered in cuts, bruises, and trails of blood, Izuku Midoriya struggled to stay awake, fighting the pain that spread from his right arm to the rest of his body like 1,000 icy needles. His body wanted him to faint, to fall from the sky, to die, whatever it took to stop the pain. As tempting as it was, the 16-year-old boy knew dying wasn't an option. Not yet, at the very least. The only acceptable outcome was for him to win. To end a battle that had started generations before he was even born, against the greatest evil the world may have ever seen. All for one. The villain stood right in front of him, recoiling from receiving a direct punch of Izuku's one for all at 100%. His right arm managed to keep up with the smash attack for a second, absorbing most of it, but in the end, the raw power was too much. Not even a spring-like limb, kinetic booster times 4, strength enhances times 3, multiplier, hypertrophy, rivets, spear-like bones arm was able to take it. The sheer force of the attack ripped apart the muscles, shattered the bones, evaporated the blood, leaving a void of nothingness where an arm should be. There it was, an opening. A tiny window, less than a fraction of a second, for Izuku to reach with his hand. Shigaraki. He screamed at the top of his lungs. The new hulking figure of All for One showed his exposed muscles, reminding Izuku of another villain he had defeated, twice at this point. But trapped inside that body, with nothing but his head, his immobile hands, and the faintest glimpse of his knees was Tamura Shigaraki. The leader of the League of Villains had been absorbed by All for One, combining their powers and making his master stronger than he'd been for the longest time. Unfortunately for young Tamura, sharing a body didn't mean he had any control whatsoever over his actions. He had lost his agency, his free will, becoming nothing but a power-up for the master of puppets. Izuku knew that Tamura wasn't loyal to his master anymore. He could tell. He could see it in the scared eyes that looked back at him from All for One's chest. He knew in his heart of hearts that even Shigaraki could be saved. Even after everything he'd done, even after all the lives he'd ended, Izuku believed that there was someone to be saved there. And how could he call himself a hero if he didn't try to save those that needed him? Just kill us, screamed Shigaraki, noticing what Izuku was trying to do. He extended his hand, trying to grab Tamura's wrist to pull him free of All for One's grasp. To get him out of there. Only then would he be able to kill his enemy, to leave nothing for him to heal from. To end the needless suffering and the dark cloud that covered the world. He almost managed to close his fingers around the exposed wrist. You fool. All for One swung his right arm with an unexpectedly fast recovery, punching Deku right in the stomach. His ribcage cracked, the air left his lungs, and for a second, the green glow and electric arcs that surrounded his body faded. Izuku could feel the warm, metallic taste of his blood in his mouth, and his vision became blurry. Promoted stories. You'll also like. Her Prince from the Underworld Path Demon is. 0.26.4K463. It's basically the same story as my Succubus Momo X Deku story. I know, Real original, but hey, now you guys get a Deku from the other side of the tracks. Hurt cuz I love you to death Izuocha. Huh. Point 9.1K 141 Class 1A is now Class 2A and is working to be better heroes due to events that had happened before. Deku has gotten strong feelings toward Uraraka during the summer as Ohm Fluke Day 112K 8.2 kilo amperes. Collection of short Ohm Fluke for 365 days. Please check the second book for the rest of the day's update. Zero Deku Onishots 31.6K 798. Because of circumstances, this book won't be continued unfortunately. Feel free to check out my other stuff. Thank you for understanding. Much needed love Yandere Succubus Momo X Izu. 52.8K 834 after Wattpad had decided to delete this story out of nowhere. I and many reader were distraught. So I'm making a remake of the story from the ground up to compensate. Mirko X Shy Male Reader 177K 1.1 Key. Don't own MHA. I hope you enjoy the story I made. Convicted Hearts 4110 like my other story but ILI longer. You're as pathetically naive as your master before you, the booming voice of All for One stated. The hand he kept pressed against Izuku began to glow. Your feeble skills are no match for my quirks. Your faith in Tamura and your friends is your weakness. And without missing a beat, he fired up his air compression, multiplier, amplification, power boost times 2 attack at point blank. Izuku barely had time to focus the energy of One for All on his core before the devastating attack hit him, rocketing him through the sky. The last thing he saw before his world turned dark was Tamura's super regeneration, bringing All for One's arm back like it had happened multiple times during their fight. Deku's senses left his body until all he could feel was dread. An incisive sense of failure, of realizing that he wasn't going to win the fight. His green, glowing hair went down, his float quirk gave up, and his physical body began to fall in a parabole. At the same time, his spirit fell to his knees on the floor of a cold room. His face was scrunched in pain as heavy tears left his eyes. His arms hung loosely to the sides of his body, and he didn't dare look up to the 8 vestiges that were glancing at him from their seats. I can't do this, he cried, his voice leaving his throat in a ragged whisper. I can't defeat him. He's too strong, too powerful. The battle's not over yet, the soft voice of the first user said, ringing inside Izuku's head. You're still in time to end my brother's reign of terror. We believe in you. I've tried. But he's relentless. He keeps regenerating, he keeps coming back as strong as ever. The more the fight drags, the weaker I get. I can't save everyone. I can't. Each time he said it, the deeper the knife sunk into his heart. Before the battle, he said to himself that he would be the hero the world needed. He'd save everyone. He'd make sure to put a stop to All for One's crusade against heroes. The moment he found out they were after Ares' quirk to truly become an unstoppable force, Izuku knew that for better or worse, this would be it. He would protect Eri and everyone else no matter the cost, and he would make sure that his battle against All for One would be the last. He had arrived in time to save some of his old classmates, whom he hadn't seen since he left the hospital a couple of months ago. And thankfully enough, he had gotten there at the very last second to keep All for One from finishing off the big three, Shoto and Bakugo, the remaining line of defense that protected Eri. Mirio, Najire, and Tamaki left with the young girl, taking her somewhere safe, battling Nomus and villains on their way out, leaving Izuku to face All for One with just the support of his two friends. As strong as they were no match for All for One's assault. Soon enough, Izuku was all that stood between the villain and victory. He told himself he would stop him right there. He'd put an end to the war between All for One and One for All. And yet, here he was, his strength leaving him as his body fell from the sky. He wouldn't be able to defeat All for One. He would fail in keeping his friends alive, in protecting Eri, in being the new symbol of peace that the world needed. You must believe in yourself, Nana Shimura said from her seat, her maternal voice trying its best to lift his spirits. There are others out there that have their faith in you, just like we do believe in yourself the same way, and turn that belief into power. Push beyond your limits and bring a smile to their faces. Izuku shook his head. I can't. I couldn't. Recovering control over his arms, he clenched his fist so hard it hurt. I couldn't save everyone. There was a pregnant pause, the silence only interrupted by his tears falling on the concrete floor. None of the vestiges spoke, until one figure stood up from his chair, closing the distance between him and Izuku. Young Midoriya. The voice came from everywhere, strong yet soft, with almost a paternal ring to it. Izuku couldn't deal with hearing that voice, he still wasn't ready to accept it, but against his better judgment, he simply couldn't avoid looking up, his teary eyes meeting the confident, warm smile of his master. All Might. The bulking hero stared at him. He looked just like he had during his prime, towering over the pathetic, kneeling figure that Izuku was. The difference between the two was more evident than ever, and that realization only hurt the green-haired boy. When I met you, you were but a quirkiness, scared boy that wished to become a hero, the vestige of Toshinori said, the smile never leaving his face. Even in the precarious position you found yourself in, you still jumped straight into danger just to do the right thing. Right then, I knew I'd found my successor. Izuku cried harder, trying his best to stay strong and keep his eyes locked on All Might's. I'm sorry. I failed you. On the contrary, seeing where you are, right now, fills me with pride and is all I need to know that I made the right choice. You are special. You have everything you need to carry my torch and make it shine brighter than I ever could. All Might's words hurt as badly as All for One's attacks. Izuku couldn't deal with it. He wanted to believe his master. He wanted to believe that he was a worthy vessel, but it all crumbled in the face of his failure. I couldn't save you, he cried. I couldn't reach you in time. I couldn't stop him. I can't stop him. I'm not as strong as you. He was now openly sobbing, his throat hurting with each ragged breath that seemed to hurt his insides. No, you're not, All Might said, surprisingly calm. You're stronger. Young Midoriya, remember, you are not fighting alone. You will never be alone. The other vestiges stood up and walked until they were all surrounding Izuku. Their bodies then began to glow, auras of all colors shining bright around them. You carry the power of one for all. The hopes and dreams of everyone. When you feel at your lowest, remember, you are not fighting by yourself. You have us, you have your friends. That's a power that All for One will never understand, one he underestimates, and one that will be his downfall. Izuku was left speechless. He felt the previous carriers of his quirk lending him their strength. It was a surge of energy that ran rampant through his veins. The pain seemed to fade away, replaced with a warm, tingling sensation. A power he felt familiar, but that he had never quite experienced this way. He looked at his hands, and then back at All Might, who smiled and offered him a hand to stand up. Don't give up hope, young Midoriya. We are here. With newfound strength, Izuku nodded, wiping the tears away with his forearm. I can't give up, everyone's counting on me, he said. They are, the first user said. Only you can stop my brother. Only you can bring hope back to this world, Nana added with a smile. I will. I will make sure everyone has a reason to smile. With a grin of his own, Izuku grabbed All Might's hand, and an explosion of light brought him back to the world. Deku. He opened his eyes. He was still falling, the sky turning around on his field of vision. Every bone in his body seemed ready to snap, but the voice that called him brought some sense into him. Uraraka. A green glow covered his body. His muscles clenched as he extended his arms and activated his float quirk, stopping his fall in a second. He stood in the middle of the air, his chest moving wide with every breath he took. His hair shone bright green, and his focused eyes seemed to let out sparks of energy. He looked down for a second, and on the battlefield he saw a bloodied Ochako, screaming for him. Their eyes met for the first time in months, and yet that was all it took. They understood each other. It was as if they could read each other's minds. He saw her desperation, her fear, but also her faith in him. And Ochako, even from this distance, could read his face and see his doubts, his hesitation, his lack of confidence. Pressing her body against a big piece of debris to keep herself from falling, she raised a hand at him, almost like she wanted to grab his even at that distance. Deku. She yelled, loud enough for him to hear. Remember your name. The memory hit him like a truck. It had been so long ago. He almost couldn't recognize himself as he remembered his first days at UA. Uraraka had been his first friend. The first one to stand up for him, going to present Mike to make sure he did okay. Talking to him like he wasn't worthless. She was the person that gave Deku a new meaning. What had once been an insulting nickname had become words of encouragement. Deku. He muttered to himself, it means you can do it. He let out a scream that roared in the sky. He was numb to the pain, feeling the energy of his quirk flooding his every cell. He was running on pure adrenaline now, more determined than ever. I won't lose. He said out loud, fixing his eyes on the mass of muscles and raw power that was All for One. I will defeat you right here and now. This will be the final word in the story of One for All, the villain said, extending his arms as he looked down on Izuku. You fought well, but just like your master before you, you will die at my hands. He launched right at Izuku with breakneck speed, soaring through the air like a bullet. He prepared a fist, crackling with the energy of countless quirks. Izuku, in return, adopted a defensive posture, ready to receive the attack, to counter it, to make a stand against the Herald of Doom that charged at him. Prominence burn. A massive column of fire shot from the ground, creating a wall of flames that stood between All for One and Izuku. The villain stopped his fly, taken aback by the surprise attack. Izuku also looked down, his eyes squinting at the biggest display of fire he had ever seen. He soon found its source in the form of Shoto Todoroki, standing on the ground with his left arm raised. Midoriya, he yelled with everything he had. We believe in you. Izuku gasped. Ah, Endeavor's son, All for One chuckled, staring down at Shoto. I should have killed you like I did your father. I knew I shouldn't leave it to Dabi. It doesn't matter. After I'm done with your friend here, you'll wish you were burned to death. Hey, fuckface. Shoto dropped his hand, and the curtain of fire dissolved, surprising both All for One and Izuku by revealing that it had concealed Katsuki's ascension in the air, who was now standing right in front of the former with both hands extended and sparks coming out of the tip of his fingers. Die. The explosion was strong enough to cover both Katsuki and All for One in a quick sphere of fire before blasting the blonde teen away, sending him down like a smoking meteor about to strike the earth. Kachan! Yelled Izuku, almost tempted to fly down to catch his friend. Focus, was all the explosion's hero was able to say. Izuku looked back at All for One, realizing that he couldn't allow himself to get distracted. With his arm cracking with green lightning, he swiped the air in front of him, sending an air current strong enough to break buildings and to dissipate the smoke that Katsuki's attack had created. All for One was still standing, suspended in the air, but Bakugo's concentrated explosion had managed to hurt him. Chunks of his arms were gone, and so was part of his chest. With a gap big enough for Tamura to be able to move his left arm. Shigaraki's eyes met Izuku and time stood still. There they were, crystal clear for Izuku to read, the eyes of someone that wanted to be saved. The eyes of a young man that understood the mistakes of his past, that realized the evil of his master. The mental manipulation he had been submitted to, the emotional abuse he had endured for years. The eyes of someone that, for once in their life, wanted nothing more than to make the right thing. Finish him, was all Tamura said, before closing his eyes and quickly moving his arm, covering his exposed neck with the palm of his left hand. Shigaraki! Yelled Izuku, the energy surging through him increasing by the second. No! What have you done? Both fighters stared in shock as Tamura Shigaraki's body started to decay. His neck, his face, his arms. All for One screamed in pain as he expulsed the dissolving body. Before themselves, the grandson of Nana Shimura turned to dust, his remainings scattered by the wind. Izuku was speechless. He clenched his fists as his eyes were filled with tears. He hadn't been able to save Shigaraki, just like he hadn't been able to save All Might, or Endeavor. But Shigaraki's sacrifice wouldn't be in vain. He had ended himself so Izuku wouldn't have to worry about damaging him. Now that he wasn't a part of All for One, Izuku could let out his full power. With his whole body shaking with energy, he threw a punch at the air in front of him. Texas smash. The explosive air column hit the still shocked form of All for One, who had to cover his face with his arms. You think such a weak attack will? He shut up when black tendrils surrounded his body, trapping him in the air. All for One tried to break free, but Izuku's black whip wasn't going to give in. With a roar, Izuku whipped him up in the air, still holding onto him as they both rocketed up in the sky, far away from the ground. This is it, Izuku said, preparing his right fist. He could see it in his mind. One for all, passing from hand to hand, from bearer to bearer, from Nana Shimura to All Might, to himself. He felt the warmth of the torch blazing in his hand, carrying with it the hopes and dreams of generations. As his body exploded with a green glow, his clenched fist had a different light. A multicolored glow that shone brighter than any lantern. Izuku launched himself at All for One, rushing through the sky to deliver the final blow. Beneath him, voices of encouragement gave him the final push he needed. Midoriya, kill him. Deku. Pulling with his left arm, he brought the entangled form of All for One into him. The Black Whip finally released him, just in time for All for One to open his mouth in surprise, and for the first time in his life, fear. One attack. One last attack to end it all, to destroy him beyond repair. This is for everyone that got me where I am the other users. My teachers. My friends. Ochako. My mom. All Might. This one is for all of you. Izuku threw his arm back, the energy in it absorbing all sounds around him, stopping for a single instant where All for One was finally aware of the true power behind One for All. A realization that would strike him as the last thing he ever learned. Smash for all. For generations to come, the world would remember the moment that Izuku's fist landed in All for One. Some would describe it as a second sun appearing in the sky, blinding for a few seconds all the television cameras and eyes that were watching him. Others would talk about the visible shockwave that spread through the sky, a harmless, expanding wave of air that was seen from Musudafu to Endoru. The people that were there when it happened or saw the TV stations that broadcasted it would also talk about the hurricane that seemed to appear in the sky, with raging winds that circled Izuku as he delivered the final blow. All Izuku could feel was the sheer power that was entrusted to him releasing on a single wave. A single attack that took away everything he had, to the last ounce of energy in his body. His right arm was struggling to keep itself together as it unleashed its destructive force. His every bone was aching at the sheer pressure he felt surrounding him from all angles. It felt like he was thousands of miles deep in the ocean, with water trying its best to crush him. He endured, however, through nothing but his will to survive. To make sure the job was finished. He kept his eyes open, watching as All for One's body gave in, becoming undone right in front of him. Twisting, breaking, disappearing. The flash of multicolored light lasted for but a few seconds, and when it was gone, All for One was no more. Izuku stared at the empty air in front of him. It took him a few seconds to realize that his momentum was stopping. He was no longer flying up, he was slowing down. He realized All for One wasn't there anymore, and with no more energy to keep his limbs stiff or to sustain his float quirk, he smiled before he began to plummet to the ground. He was suddenly once again inside his mind, standing up in the room with all the vestiges watching from their seats. 8 pairs of eyes scanned him with proud smiles on their faces. Did it work? Izuku asked, not being able to stop himself from asking. Did I really? Everyone turned to look at the fourth user, who had closed his eyes and tilted his head at Izuku's question. For decades, danger sense kept buzzing in my head, said Hikage with a solemn voice. As long as All for One was out there, waiting to get one for all, neither I nor the current user would be safe. It kept buzzing in the back of my mind. Now. He looked at Izuku with a warm smile. Now, for the first time in generations, I hear nothing. Izuku fell on his knees. Understanding dawned on him. It's over. He said, his eyes tearing up as he thought of everything he had lost to get to that point. Of all the pain suffered. Of the lives that had been lost. You did it, kiddo, said Daigoro, the fifth user. You defeated All for One. You've succeeded where we all failed, said En, his smile hidden behind the neck of his jacket. Generations of pain and suffering have been avenged, added the second user. With my brother finally defeated, you have fulfilled my dream. For that, I thank you. We all believed in you, and you've gone far and beyond all of our expectations. With only less than 2 years of training, you were able to face the world's greatest menace and you've come on top. Izuku Midoriya, you truly are a hero. Izuku was once again openly sobbing, though this time an ugly smile was plastered on his crying face. The palms of his hands were cupping his cheeks, his fingers threatening to rip the flesh off with how hard they pressed against his face. I did it, I won, he thought. He finally looked up at all the vestiges of the previous users, but he stopped on Nana Shimura. I couldn't save Shigaraki, he admitted with a pang of guilt. I thought I could save him. Nana smiled at him, though she couldn't hide the tiny tears in the corner of her eyes. Tamura found redemption on his own accord. He took away all for one's regeneration and gave you the opening you needed to win. He wouldn't have done it if it wasn't because of you believing in him. You made him see the mistakes of his past, and you let him know that he was still in time to make amends. You may not have saved his life, but you saved my grandson from being a tool for all for one. Izuku was floored. It was too much information. He didn't know what to think, what to make of it. He didn't know how to proceed. What happens now? He asked them. Do I still have one for all? They all smiled, and All Might openly laughed. Young Midoriya, he said from his seat, we will forever live in you. This power is yours to keep. Yours to make the world a better place. Speaking of which, your time has not come yet. You should go back. People are waiting for you, the new symbol of peace. The world of the vestiges faded to white. Izuku came back into consciousness only to realize he was free falling. He could see the sky above, with clouds still twisting like a hurricane. He tried to will himself to stop, to float, but there were no energies left in him. His arms and legs weren't responding. As he kept falling, he couldn't help to chuckle. At least they're not broken, he thought, and it was oddly comforting. He was mildly aware of the fact that he was probably falling to his death without any means to stop, but before he could even begin to process that fact, he felt his back impacting something, and suddenly his whole body became weightless, slowing his fall almost to a stop. When the flash of light ended, Ochako found herself looking at the sky for any sign of movement. She saw the shockwave, and the strong winds threatened to blow her away, but she anchored herself and stood her ground. She wasn't going anywhere. She wouldn't leave until she made sure that Izuku was okay. That he was alive. She had briefly seen a flash of him when he came back to join the fray alongside Hawks and Best Jeanist. A green spear of lightning that fell from the sky and crushed Gigantomachia, saving Smintos, Vlad King, and most of Class 2B as they tried to contain the beast. She had then seen a glimpse of him as he flew through the school grounds, defeating whatever villain in Nomu stood in his way towards All for One. She had been too busy fighting for her life against Toga, but the moment she won, she ran after him. She had been devastated when she got his letter explaining why he was leaving UA. Explaining his story, the power he inherited from All Might, the reasons why he couldn't be near them. She had been a mess for weeks. She felt awful. How had she never suspected anything of this big secret he was carrying? Wasn't she supposed to be his best friend? She was supposed to be there for him, and yet she never knew of the heavy burden he was carrying. A power destined to be faced against a terrible villain. A death sentence on his head. She wished she could have been there for him, to support him, to offer him help. She hated herself for not realizing earlier that he needed her support. And she also hated Izuku for being such a hero. For trying to do the right thing and distance himself. For leaving them. For leaving her. For being so selfless. Had he asked her, she would have left with him. As dangerous as it was, she would have done it just to help him in any way she could. She'd spent countless nights crying herself to sleep, worrying about him. Her friends noticed, but no one knew what to say to help her. Or they knew that nothing they said would help. The past few months had been terrible for her. And then, just like that, when they were under attack, he showed up. She knew he was heading to face All for One, and she could tell that this would be their final confrontation. She knew there was nothing she could do to help other than let him know that she was there for him. That's why she called him. Why she screamed his name and made him remember that he was Deku. That he could do it, that she knew he could do it. That final blow had been the most astonishing thing she'd ever seen. She looked at the sky for any sign of him, until she saw a tiny speck of green falling. Deku! She screamed, her eyes filled with tears. Izuku was there, and there were no signs of All for One. He did it, said the voice of Katsuki, standing up with shaking knees. The bastard did it. Shoto was on the other side of the destroyed ground, sliding down a piece of debris until he sat on the floor. He also looked up at where Katsuki and Ochako's eyes pointed. Midoriya, well done. The three stared at their friend as he kept falling, and falling, and falling, and falling. He's not slowing down, said Katsuki, getting ready to fly to catch him, but his legs gave in and he fell face first into the ground. Ochako didn't hesitate. She touched her chest with her good hand, the one that hadn't been pierced through with a knife by Toga, made her body weightless, and kicked the rocks beneath her with all the strength she could muster. She rocketed up as fast she could manage, making sure to alter her trajectory to catch up with Izuku as he fell. He was falling at terminal speed, but she was ready for him. She extended the palm of her hand and, readying herself for the recoil, she slapped it against Izuku's back as their paths converged. The pain was immediate, but just as fast, his body became weightless and floated right next to her. She ignored the pain and wrapped her arms around him. She turned him around until he was facing her, and her heart skipped a beat when she noticed how beaten he looked. The upper part of his costume was completely shredded, with nothing but a few straps of cloth sticking to his left side. His naked torso was filled with bruises, cuts, swollen joints, and burn marks. His hair was wet with his sweat, and his expression was tired. His eyes met hers, and she could feel new tears running down her pink cheeks. Deku, she said, her eyes filled with worry. She'd missed his freckles, his green bangs, his kind eyes. Above everything else, she'd missed his warm smile, the same one he gave her with whatever strength he had left. Uraraka, he said, and hearing his voice was something Ochako didn't know would ever bring her such joy. It's over. It's over. She pulled him into a hug, soft enough to not hurt him, but strong enough to let him feel all the desperation, fear, misery, and anxiety she'd been carrying for weeks. But she also let him feel just how ridiculously happy she was that he was alive. That he was there, with her. Deku, she said, unable to form a single sentence as they slowly floated down to the ground with the momentum that was left from his fall as he hit her hand. She felt his muscles straining, but before she could tell him to stop moving and rest, he managed to wrap his arms around her back, returning the hug. It's over, he repeated with a tired voice, and Ochako couldn't help to smile. Within a minute they finally reached the ground, and Ochako gently lay him down. She didn't want to let go of him, she didn't, but he needed to rest. And medical attention right away. Deku kept his eyes on her face, smiling even as a gentle string of tears fell from his eyes. Uraraka. Don't cry, he asked, trying to raise a hand to maybe wipe her tears away, but she held onto it and tried to keep him from straining himself. Deku. Deku, please, you need to rest, she said in a whisper. I'm sorry I made you worried. It's okay. Why you did what you needed to do, I understand. I don't want you to worry. I don't want anyone to be worried ever again. She sighed as she chuckled, tears still coming out strong. That was Izuku all right. Even after defeating the biggest, worst villain to ever roam the planet, he didn't want to worry others. Shoto walked next to them, limping with his right leg, with a swollen ankle and a bloodied knee. Midoriya, he said, his inexpressive face staring down at Izuku. Todoroki. Thank you, said Izuku, smiling at him. If it wasn't for you and Kachan. Shoto sighed, and then smiled. It was, quite literally, the least we could do. Speak for yourself, said the grumpy voice of Katsuki, approaching them from the side. His arms were bruised, his hero suit destroyed, and his hands looked purple. I left him open for you, Deku. Don't forget who gave you your chance to be the hero. Ochako stared at Bakugo. He sounded his usual self, annoyed and permanently angry at the world, but there was something there that she couldn't quite figure. Something in his eyes, in the way he spoke. And then Izuku began to laugh. A painful laugh that gave away that there was something wrong with his ribs, and while it worried Ochako, it also broke the tension in the air. Of course, Kachan. You were amazing up there. Bakugo sighed, looking away from him. Damn right I was. Then, with a small smirk, added, I guess you did pretty good yourself, Deku. Izuku kept laughing, and Ochako found herself lost in that wonderful sound. It felt surreal. She couldn't even remember the last time she'd heard him laugh. She couldn't remember the last time any of them had laughed like that. She smiled, and her grip on his hand tightened. It hurt the open wound that Toga had left there, but she didn't mind. She could take it, over there. They're here. The four students looked up from the big crater they were in on the edges of it. Multiple figures were coming in. Some in better shape than others. They saw Kirishima's red hair, even from the distance. Mina's pink skin, Sue's green suit, the rest of his classmates. They saw present Mike's blonde hair, Ectoplasm's coat. Class 2B. Best Genist, helping a wounded Hawks. Kamui Woods and a regular-sized Mount Lady. Helicopters approached them, all the lights and cameras pointing at Izuku on the ground, lying next to Ochako. She heard him sigh and felt his muscles shaking as he tried and failed to sit up. Deku. You can't. They need to see me, he said, with such conviction that it silenced Ochako's doubts. And then he smiled at her, and she could see in that smile more than just reassurance and confidence. It was a smile that meant so much more. A smile that wasn't aimed at just her, she knew. And then he said his next words, and it all clicked for her. They need to know that I am here. She was floored, speechless as he gritted his teeth and forced his bones and muscles to work. Trails of blood were running down his arms and his whole back shook with the strain to stand up. He almost fell, but Ochako finally reacted and caught him before he did. Izuku turned his head to look at her. I'm sorry, Uraraka. I'm kinda drained after that fight, he admitted, giving out a nervous chuckle. You don't say, she said, before grabbing his arm and putting it around her shoulders, helping him stand up. It's okay, Deku. I've got you. He nodded, and she was happy that he accepted her help. She was half expecting him to say he needed to do this alone, to stand proud. But Deku wasn't prideful. He was kind and understanding. She was grateful for it because she decided right then and there that she would never let him carry all the responsibility and weight of the world on his shoulders alone. She knew that as long as he'd let her, she'd always be there for him. He allowed her to carry him away from the big debris until they reached a relatively cleared area. All the rushing heroes and friends stopped, giving him space. Ochako and Izuku felt their gazes, though she knew they weren't looking at her. She turned her head to look at Izuku, and he returned the look. Do it, Deku, she encouraged him. Show the world you've won. He smiled before looking forward with determined eyes. His smile grew wider, bigger, and not without visible pain and effort. He raised his closed, left fist up to the sky. Everyone began to cheer, their friends crying in joy, happy to see Midoriya back. The pro-heroes celebrated, some nodded with a knowing smirk, all of them with proud looks on their faces. Ochako, staring at Izuku, felt a sense of pride swell in her heart. She thought she had cried all the tears her eyes could manage already but was surprised to find out she still had more to shed. Happy tears, this time. Proud tears. She tightened her grip on him as she looked at his smiling, reassuring face. You've come so far, Deku. Farther than any of us. You've earned this. I'm so happy for you. I am here, he said, clear and loud enough for the whole world to hear it. Chapter 2. The Two Pardons. The rest of the day had been an emotional roller coaster for Ochako. Her classmates had all rushed to make sure that she, Izuku, Katsuki, and Shoto were okay. Naturally, they were most excited about finally being able to talk to Izuku, after the long months he had spent away from them. The reunion was chaotic, but Class 2A wouldn't have had it in any other way. Mineta, Shiro, Kaminari, and Kirishima weren't able to keep the excitement out of their voices as they made sure to let Izuku know how much of a badass he had looked like as he ran around the school saving them all from those nasty Nomus that they could barely contain. Toru and Mina, on the other hand, were hardcore fangirling about him, saying how brave and strong he was, congratulating him for defeating All for One. Ochako would have gotten a bit jealous, but she was the one carrying Izuku, and his weight against her was oddly reassuring. This was the physically closest they had ever been and she was loving it. She had a tight but gentle grip on him, and part of her was happy to know that he wouldn't be going anywhere. Not without her. So when Best Jeanist, Hawks, and a grumpy, short old man, whose name she didn't know but that she had seen on TV fighting alongside All Might in the Camino battle, came to tell them all that they needed to get Izuku to the hospital, she refused to leave his side. I'll go with him, she stated. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't ask if it was okay for her to join them. The pro-heroes looked at her with a raised eyebrow. Midoriya must be exhausted from the battle, Best Jeanist said. You also seem to be hurt. Maybe it would be best if you let us. I'm not leaving him, she interrupted, fierce determination on her face as she stood up to the current number 2 hero. Deku's my best friend, and I'm not leaving him. Not after so long. She could feel the rest of the class's eyes darting between her and Best Jeanist. She even seemed to hear Bakugo letting out an approving snicker behind her. She could also see and feel Izuku's green eyes fixed on her, and how he whispered her name with surprise in his voice. Uravati, we understand your concerns, the old man said, and Ochako was surprised to find that he knew her hero name, but there are some things we ought to discuss with young Midoriya, and it might be better if we do it in private. With all due respect, sir, she can be there. Ochako turned to look at Izuku. His eyelids seemed heavy, and he was struggling to stay awake, but he made sure his voice was loud and clear when he spoke. Deku. She's my best friend. I trust her. I probably should start showing more of that trust, instead of just saying it, he said, giving her an apologetic smile. I don't want to keep any more secrets from her. Oh, or any other of my friends, for that matter. I don't mind her coming with us. He looked away, and they could all see a slight blush spreading on his face. I would like her company. Ochako wondered if Jiro could hear her heart drumming against her chest. She wondered if everyone could hear it because it sure felt strong and loud after his kind words. Her expression softened, and she gently tightened her grip on him. He didn't seem to mind, and forgetting about the dozens of people that surrounded them, they shared a small moment where they smiled at each other. A moment where it all felt all right, where the pain and exhaustion were gone. A moment that reminded Ochako how much she'd missed him. The old man sighed, shaking his head with a knowing smile. Best Jeanist's expression was unreadable, but he didn't seem particularly thrilled. Hawks, on the contrary, looked extremely bored as he stretched his back and grunted in pain. He took out his broken visor, examining the damages before casually throwing it to the ground. I mean, if Midori is fine with it, then what's the problem? No need to make this more complicated than necessary. Come on, kid, let's get on the ambulance. The two top heroes and the old man turned around, and Ochako helped Izuku walk behind them. Some of their classmates tried to join, but the teachers managed to stop them. As much as they wanted to be with Izuku, they needed to take care of themselves first. Some were just now getting past the adrenaline rush, and their wounds were not only beginning to hurt more, but the weight of everything that had happened was settling in. It did as well for Ochako, but she tried not to think about it as she dragged her best friend through the path that the pro heroes opened for them, cheering and congratulating Izuku as they walked past. The rest of the school was there as well. Class 2B, the general studies. Even pro heroes who had arrived at UA as soon as they found out about the attack, trying their best to help. Thank you, Uraraka, Izuku said after a while. I know we have a lot to talk about. Oh, we do, she said, flashing a playful smirk at him. You think you can really just run away for 2 months and leave only a letter for me? He let out a nervous laugh and raised his left arm to scratch the back of his head. Why, yeah, I know it looks bad, but I was just. Shish, save it, I'm just happy that you're back, she admitted. He tilted his head to the side, letting it rest against hers. I'm happy to be back. Her heart fluttered, and she was filled with a warm sensation, like a whole bag of popcorn popping off inside her stomach. She lost control of her quirk for a second, and in an instant, Izuku's body became weightless as it floated an inch above the ground. Oops. Sorry. Actually, this is better, he said, chuckling. My legs aren't cooperating. Would you mind? He blushed as he trailed off, and Ochako snorted. Was he embarrassed to ask for her to carry him with her quirk? It's okay, I don't mind. I probably should have done this earlier. They quickly got to the ambulance, with the old man joining them, and Ochako only let go of him when the medics took him and placed him on a stretcher. Even then, she insisted on staying by his side, something Izuku made sure to thank her for. Ochako noticed that pro heroes were escorting them on the street, making sure that nothing happened to them on their way to the hospital. One of the paramedics started applying all sorts of first aids to Izuku, who didn't complain or resist, while a second one tried to check on Ochako. I'm fine, really, she said, trying to wave her off. That's a nasty wound on your hand, miss. At least let me take a look at it. Uraraka, she's right, Izuku said, looking at her with worry in his eyes. It may not be fatal, but you should make sure your tendons aren't damaged, the old man said. Losing movement on a hand for not taking care of it would be a shame. She tried to argue for a bit but ended up agreeing. The look the paramedic gave her didn't seem to help her nerves. At least it stopped hurting when she applied a local anesthetic and began cleaning her wound. Ochako turned to look at the pro hero. Excuse me, sir. I was wondering, what's your name? Gran Torino, a pleasure to meet you. Toshinori spoke kindly of you. All Might, he clarified when he noticed her confused look. Oh, I saw you two together during the fight in Kamino. He was one of All Might's mentors, Izuku explained. And he also helped train me when I was still getting used to One for All. It's thanks to him that I developed my shoot style. Ochako turned to look at the old hero with wide eyes. All Might's mentor. She had never heard of him before. And he had helped Izuku with his quirk. She gently bowed her head. It's an honor to meet you, sir. No need to be formal. So, before we get to the hospital and everything gets more complicated, I guess I should ask, how much do you know about everything that has happened in the past few months? Ochako winced at the pain in her hand, but it might as well have been at the frustration of feeling like there was so much she was missing. I know about Deku's quirk. I know why All for One was after him. I know he left our school to avoid making us a target. We saw him in the news when Endeavor and All Might were killed, she said, her face twisting in worry as she saw the way Izuku reacted to the name of his late idol. And that's pretty much it. Gran Torino nodded in silence, before turning his attention to Izuku. It would probably be for the best if you told her about the work you were doing with the top three heroes and All Might before the situation escalated. Izuku sighed. Yeah, that's probably for the best. As the paramedic kept cleaning out his wounds and putting bandages over the most serious cuts and injuries he had, he spilled it all out, and the more he revealed, the more worried Ochako grew. By the time they got to the hospital, she was even more adamant about not leaving his side. You were going after such dangerous villains, she said, holding one of his hands. Deku, why did you do this all alone? Why didn't you tell me? Us. We would have helped you if we knew. I know. Which is exactly why I didn't tell you, he admitted. I didn't want to drag you guys into my mess. We're your friends. I know. We were so worried about you, Deku. You. You have no idea how much we worried. He looked away. I know. Like I said, I didn't want to. He couldn't tell you. Gran Torino intervened, earning a glance from the two young heroes. What he did, although for all the right reasons, was highly illegal. His work as a vigilante broke many laws. Even the pro-heroes that helped him were indulging in criminal activity. Involving more people than what was necessary would have only made things worse, and the job he was doing required secrecy. Midoriya may have put too much pressure on himself and refused to share the load, but given how everything's turned out, I think he deserves some understanding from his friends. Ochako wasn't a fan of that. She obviously understood why he did it. She could see his reasoning and why he thought he was doing them a favor by keeping them out of his troubles. She wasn't going to hold it against him or hate him for it, but what about her? She had suffered his absence. She had been worried sick. Countless nights she had cried herself to sleep, wondering what he was up to. If he was okay. If he was still alive. If she would ever see him again. She had to come to terms with the fact that she had been right, long ago, when she decided that her feelings needed to be pushed away for her to focus on being a hero. And that, though she had tried her hardest, she had ultimately failed. She cared way too much for him. And she knew he cared for her too, obviously, but he was too focused on being a hero. After reading his letter and learning the challenges he was facing, she couldn't blame him at all. She was thinking of romance while he had the sword of Damocles hanging over his head, trying to gain full control of his quirks so he could be ready to fight a villain that textbooks didn't dare speak of. She hated herself when she was forced to face that revelation. She felt out of touch, like she couldn't look at the big picture, too focused on her feelings. And yet, as the weeks went by, she concluded that her feelings mattered, too. They weren't trivial. She felt hurt and worried that he'd left without saying a proper goodbye. She could understand him, but didn't she deserve some understanding as well? She had agency. She was old enough to make her own choices, to decide whether she wanted to risk her life helping him or not. At the very least, she felt that she deserved a better explanation. A conversation. Perhaps it was selfish, but she didn't like the idea of other people making decisions for her. She lowered her head and clenched her fists. Was she really going to go off about this? Was she really gonna speak up? She looked up at both Izuku and Gran Torino with fire in her eyes. Oh, yes, she was. I understand why he did it, but just because it worked out doesn't mean that it was the right thing to do. Izuku looked away, but she put a hand on his shoulder, forcing him to stare at her eyes as she talked. She wanted him to see the honesty in them. The worry. Deku, you won. You did something incredible. And I knew you could do it. I've always believed in you. Uraraka. But do you have any idea of how I'd feel if something bad had happened to you? If you died? The temperature in the back of the ambulance dropped. The paramedics kept trying to be professional, working on the two wounded teenagers in the least intrusive way possible, trying to stay invisible. Gran Torino tilted his head slightly, his critical eye analyzing their body language and every word that escaped their mouths. Izuku seemed to be at a loss for words, so Ochako pushed further. I would have had to live with that for the rest of my life. I'd wonder if there was anything I could have done. If I should have realized what you were struggling with earlier. If I should have chased after you. Deku. If anything happened to you, I don't know how I could have lived with it. He tried to sit up, but he was too tired, so he fell back with a grunt and gave her an apologetic look. I'm sorry I worried you. I know it was dangerous. But I had to do it, I needed to. I'm not mad at you for doing it, she said, cutting him short, and her eyes started to sting. I know that you can't help yourself. You always put yourself in danger if you think that's the right thing to do. It's what makes you such a great hero. So no, I'm not mad at you for doing all this crazy work you did, or for fighting all for one. She stopped for a second to quickly rub her eyes and push back the tears that threatened to fall. I'm mad at you for not letting me help you. I don't care if it was dangerous. I don't care if it was illegal. I'm not as good in combat as you or Bakugo, but I'm going to be a hero, too. She sternly said, I want to be the kind of hero that helps people, including other heroes. And I can see it in your face. You needed to be saved, too. She then surprised even herself as she took a hand and placed it on his cheek. Izuku's face turned beet red and his shoulders tensed. Uraraka could feel her cheeks burning, but decided to shake those thoughts away and focus on what was important right then. She needed to let it all out at that very moment because she wasn't sure she'd ever find the courage to speak up like that again. You went through so much, Deku. Fighting all those villains. Being away from everyone you loved. Losing All Might. You were looking after everyone, trying to protect and save us, but who was looking after you? Your eyes, they look like you've been going through so much. Maybe I wouldn't be much help against Nomus and the crazy powerful villains you were after, but I could have found other ways to help. Maybe just being there for you when you needed to talk. I don't know. I don't even know what I'm saying anymore. She let out a nervous chuckle, trying to keep the unbridled tidal wave of her emotions from taking over and drowning her. I just know that I've missed you so much. And I'm mad that you wouldn't let me help you. I know you don't want people to worry about you, but you're my best friend. I'm always going to worry about you. So you might as well do both of us a favor and let me help you. He bit his trembling lip, and when he teared up, any defenses she may have tried to build up crumbled. She threw herself at him, crying on his shoulder. She completely forgot about the paramedics that were still trying to take care of them, and they allowed her to have her moment with Izuku. He showed once again just how resilient he was, finding strength from within to wrap his arms around her. You Uraraka, I'm so sorry. I didn't. I know, she said, holding him like she never wanted to let go and she didn't. I'm mad, but not angry mad. More like, worried mad. I'll forgive you. But you gotta promise me that, next time you want to do something crazy, you'll talk to me first. It was a blatant lie. She had already forgiven him the moment he returned. It was easy to be mad at him when she didn't know if she would ever see him again. It was hard to stay mad at Izuku when she had him in her arms, his tears coating her shoulder, and seeing the regret in his eyes. Plus, he was the guy that saved the world by punching all for one so hard that the weather changed. He deserved some credit. But she couldn't let him know that, at least not yet. Izuku sighed and let go of his grip on her enough to rest back against the stretcher and give her a tired grin. I promise, he said. Ochako wiped the trails of tears off her face and then raised her fist. I forgive you, then. They sealed the deal with smiles on their faces and a fist bump. Unfortunately, Ochako was so emotional that she went a bit overboard with the gesture and forgot how fragile Izuku's bones were at the moment. For the next 2 minutes, she found herself apologizing profusely as Izuku shook his hand in the air like it was set on fire. Gran Torino didn't stop laughing until they reached the hospital. By the time the ambulance parked, the painkillers were already taking effect, and Izuku stopped feeling like his body was nothing but a pile of broken pieces being held together by duct tape. It felt more like that one time he had to carry All Might's buffed form on his back all across the beach. Only instead of All Might, it was Fat Gum and Gang Orca, and instead of carrying them across the beach, he was lying on a nail bed while the two danced the tango on top of him. It was worth it, though. He had won. He had defeated All for One. He'd done All Might proud, showing the world he was there to keep his legacy alive. That there was a new generation of heroes ready to take on the challenge and protect everyone. Feeling pain all over his body was a sacrifice he was willing to make in exchange for that. He was no stranger to pain. He could deal with it. Having Ochako by his side also helped alleviate his pain. The couple of months he spent on the run, coordinating with the top three heroes and All Might had been pretty lonely for him. He only truly talked and spent fleeting moments with his mentor. The rest of the time, he was by himself, capturing supervillains, getting lectures and training from the other successors, mastering the control of all his quirks. The danger, adrenaline, and urgency of his missions were enough to keep him distracted during the day. Late at night, however, as he found a corner in an alley or rooftop to try to close his eyes and get some sleep, he was helpless against the intrusive thoughts that plagued his mind. He missed everyone: his mom, his teachers, his friends. God, did he miss his friends? He never had any true friends growing up, only Kachan, but their bond was far from a typical friendship. He'd told himself that it was okay, that he didn't need friends like that. He was happy just being there in school, analyzing his classmates' quirks and keeping track of Kachan's progress. It made him think that maybe, one day, he'd be able to catch up to him and everyone else. And maybe, one day, they'd see him as their equal. That thought seemed to be enough for him, and though he had episodes of loneliness and some slight depression, though he would never admit to it out loud, he believed he had been living a happy life. And then he got into UA, and he made real friends. Friends that complimented his brain, his tactics, that were impressed by his quirk, that accepted him with open arms. And that's when he realized truly what he had been missing his whole life: a sense of companionship, community, people to rely on, to laugh with, to cry with. He had finally gotten that, and then he had to give it away. Turn his back on his friends, and run away. To keep them safe. He'd cried a lot thinking about them. Iida, Su, Kirishima, Kachan, Ochako. Leaving them behind, going solo to do what was right. At the time, he wasn't sure whether this was a mission he could come out of alive. It pained him to think that, maybe, he would never get to see them again. The moment Hawks contacted him to let him know that All for One was attacking UA to get Eri, he felt his heart stop. He didn't even realize his legs were kicking the air at 80% of his power to get there faster. He wasn't even thinking of how All for One getting Eri's quirk would make him an unstoppable force. He was only worried about the child and his friends. He couldn't let them get hurt. He couldn't allow it. It was still too early to be sure of it, but he believed that the only reason he could sustain One for All at 100% without breaking his body was because of his resolve to use it to protect his friends. He didn't care what happened to him, but unlike before, he was aware that giving one devastating attack that would leave him crippled wasn't the way to help everyone. Unlike previous times, he was mindful of the consequences of his actions. When he fought Todoroki at the sports festival, he was okay with breaking his fingers because he believed that helping his friend was more important. Against All for One, however, he could only save everyone by staying alive. And somehow that determination, that resolve, was able to grant him better control of his full power. It still hurt like hell, but as the ambulance doors flung open and Ochako stood up, keeping a hand on his shoulder for reassurance, he realized he was ready to deal with whatever came his way after succeeding in his mission. Of course, when the paramedics took his stretcher out of the ambulance and he realized what was going on around him, he questioned that idea. Best Jeanist and Hawks were waiting for him outside of the ambulance, but their eyes were set on the multitude of journalists that were stationed outside of the hospital, barely contained by a police line and several pro-heroes. The lurkers were there, with Edgeshot, Kamui Woods, and Mount Lady. The three seemed to have been escorting the ambulance, and as soon as they got there, they helped keep the reporters at bay. A couple more heroes helped as well, and Izuku's inner fanboy was ecstatic knowing that they were all there because of him. Come on, Midoriya, some people are waiting for you, Hawks said, making a sign for the paramedics to follow him as he and Best Jeanist began walking to the secondary entrance to the hospital that had been cleared for him. Gran Torino walked by his side, while Ochako stayed close to him. As they moved, all the flashes were soon on him, and he could hear some of the questions that they were asking him. Izuku Midoriya, what's your relationship with All Might? Why was the villain all for one after you? Are you Hawks and Best Jeanist's sidekick? What is the secret to your quirk? Is it true that you were engaged in vigilante activity with Endeavor and the current top two heroes? Hawks raised a hand to look at the press. No comments. The reporters pressed forward, asking louder and faster, but Izuku was dragged inside the hospital before he could get a headache. Oh, wow, he said, once the doors closed behind him and the chaos of the press seemed to die down. Thank you. That was insane. Throw a Nomu at me, but I definitely don't want to deal with those guys anytime soon. Oh, I get you, young man, said a very tired voice a few feet ahead of him, half yawning, but unfortunately, we're all gonna have to address them soon. When the paramedics stepped away, the color drained from Izuku's face. Walking towards him, he saw Yokumiru Mera from the Hero Public Safety Commission and Chief of Police Saragame. Hawks, Best Jeanist, and Gran Torino seemed unfazed by their presence, but Izuku felt every aching muscle in his body tensing. All Might had warned him of how illegal his rogue escapades were. He made sure to list out every single law he'd be breaking. And at the end of the scary long list, he had still agreed to do what had to be done. It was worth the risk. But now he was being approached by the chief of police and a representative of the HPSC, and he just knew that he had run out of luck. It was time to face the consequence of his actions. Would he be facing time in prison? Was he going to be banned from ever becoming a hero? What was going to happen to him now? Just when the questions were starting to become too much for his battered head to handle, he felt Ochako's hold on his shoulder tightening. He looked up at her and realized that she looked worried, but she was also shooting daggers at the two figures of authorities. She was putting two and two together, and she didn't seem to be particularly thrilled at their presence. How's the boy holding up? He looks rough, said the chief of police, showing his dog mannerisms. He's stable, said the female paramedic. I used my quirk to scan him. There's no internal bleeding or fractured bones, but he has multiple bruised ribs and strains all over his body. Is it possible to delay the treatment so we can have a conversation with him first? It is, though I would recommend keeping it short. His body needs to rest. Chief Saragame looked at Mara and gave him a small nod. Mara let out a new yawn and rubbed the back of his neck. Yeah, we'll go straight to the point. Genist, Hawks, Mr. Torino, you all need to come with us, young lady. You can go with the paramedics to make sure. She's staying, said Izuku, beating Ochako to the punch by a second. He knew she'd insist on staying with him, and it would be better if he was the insolent one that defied the authorities instead of her. He was deep into trouble anyway. The two adults looked at each other, while Best Jeanist shook his head slightly. The things we need to discuss, Mara began, but once again, Izuku interrupted him. Are things she's aware of or things I don't mind her learning? I'll only speak if she's allowed to be there. He didn't even know if he was in a position to make demands like that. He probably wasn't. What was he supposed to do? He had a right to make a call, right? Should he spend it to get in touch with a lawyer? Could he even afford a lawyer? Who's the girl? Asked the chief. She's part of Midoriya's class at UA. A second-year student. Got her provisional license last year, Mara explained, sounding even more tired than usual. All right, fine, she can tag along. Everything we talk about is going to become public soon anyway. Come with us. As they all headed to an empty room, Ochako smiled at Izuku, who tried to shrug his shoulders but winced at the pain. After using the elevator, they soon got to a room that had been prepared for him. Standing outside of it, the pro-hero Death Arms was keeping watch. He stepped aside to open the door for the newcomers and bowed his head at them. His eyes rested on Izuku for a couple of seconds, and the green-haired boy wondered if he remembered him as the quirkless kid he had once scolded for running straight into danger. If he did, he didn't say anything, and seconds later, everyone was taking a seat around Izuku's bed. Ochako pulled her chair as close to him as humanly possible, and he had to control his blushing face. If they were going to arrest him and take his picture, he would rather not look flustered. All right, said Mara, resting his elbows on his knees and using both hands to rub his brows. We have a lot to discuss and not much time, so we should go straight to the point. He looked up at Izuku and pointed an accusing finger at him. You, he said, before pointing at Hawks and Best Jeanist, you, and you, have broken many, many laws. Guilty as charged, said Hawks with a grin, putting both arms behind his head. The Hero Public Safety Commission had been shut down due to a lack of employees and all the damages our institution suffered at the hands of Redestro's double, but in the past 2 weeks, we've been restarting our operations. And after today, we need to make our presence strong again to regain the public's trust. And that means we need to take action about everything that has been going on these past few months. We can't keep looking to the side. What does that mean? Asked Ochako. It means we need to address the fact that the current top two heroes were allowing a young boy to act as a vigilante, going way beyond what his provisional hero license allows. Which is, as you all know, an illegal activity. He was doing the right thing. You can't. You can't be serious. Izuku looked at how distressed Ochako looked, and although he could understand where she was coming from, this was something he had already accepted. Uraraka, don't worry, it's going to be fine, he tried to reassure her. How can it be fine? Deku, they're treating you like you're a criminal. He is, Gran Torino said like he was just pointing out that the walls were painted white. He knew the risks and the consequences of his actions. He defeated All for One. And what? You guys are gonna put him in jail because of it? That's not what we said, intervened the chief of police. Just that we need to address what he's done, woof. Izuku and Ochako looked at each other with confused eyes before tilting their heads at Saragame. Mara sighed and stretched his back. At this point, the press is already putting together pieces of information. There have been many reports, in the Paw Street few months, of a mysterious figure capturing criminals and delivering them to the police. There are eyewitnesses, and after your battle against All for One that was broadcasted to the entire nation, nay, the world, well, we can't just pretend nothing happened as we did with your involvement with the hero killer Stain. Ochako gasped and turned to look at Izuku. Hadn't he told her the truth about Stain? No. Oh, wow. He needed to start keeping track of all his lies. So, they all know it was me doing vigilante work, he muttered, looking defeated. There's no way around it. No, there's not. It's public knowledge by now. What's done, it's done. No need to tear yourself up. We're gonna do a press conference tonight confirming that it was, indeed, you who was doing all this illegal activity. He felt his stomach twisting. He was supposed to be the new symbol of peace. An inspirational figure to all citizens. A beacon of hope. Going to jail at 16 didn't seem like a great start. Does this mean that I'll be arrested? He asked with a dry throat. Hawks and Gran Torino snickered, and both the chief of police and Maris straightened their backs, seemingly shocked at what he had just suggested. Are you insane? The latter asked, shaking his head in disbelief. No, kiddo, you were broadcasted saving the world. People are head over heels for you right now. How could we arrest you? Izuku blinked twice. But you said. We need to address what happened. But as we speak, the heads up at the Hero Public Safety Commission are redacting an official pardon for you, he explained, and Izuku felt the weight of the world leaving his shoulders. We will be acknowledging all the illegal work that you were doing for the past few months and talk about the legal consequences you'd normally be facing, but that's just to discourage others from breaking the law. The president herself will make a statement to officially get you off the hook for all the trouble you got yourself into. Both Izuku and Ochako let out all the air they had inadvertently been holding in their chests. None of the pro-heroes seemed particularly surprised to hear this. Mera gave Izuku half a smile and scratched the back of his head. We would like to encourage you to stay within the scope of the law in the future, however. Izuku gave out a nervous smile, looking away. I'll try it. Of course you will, of course. Oh, you too, by the way, he added, looking at Best Jeanist and Hawks. You two won't get your hero licenses suspended, but you'll have to pay a heavy fine for allowing Midoriya to do vigilante work without alerting the authorities. Hawks shrugged while Best Jeanist squinted his eyes. Does the commission need money to start rebuilding? Nah, the government is already redirecting all kinds of funds our way. We just need to set an example. You did risk a child's life, after all. Jeanist ended up letting out a small sigh. I suppose it's only fair. So is that it? Izuku asked, looking relieved. Do I have to do anything? Sign any paper? We'll get to the paperwork when the time comes, Mara said. There's some other stuff we need to discuss. Especially how things are gonna change moving forward for you, Midoriya. He didn't like the sound of that. It was too ominous. What do you mean? Well, for starters, I guess I have the honor of telling you that the Hero Public Safety Commission has decided to approve your hero license and has registered you as a pro hero. All sound died in the room, to the point where Izuku could hear his heartbeat and the ragged breaths that went in and out of his lungs. Had he heard that right? His hero license. At his side, Ochako kept darting his eyes from him to Mara, her mouth open in evident shock. I mean, how? What? He realized he couldn't even finish a single sentence. You see, the pardon is enough to keep the media from asking too many questions about your involvement in those activities and possible consequences, but there are a bunch of legal ramifications moving forward that would make things complicated if you stay with just your provisional license. An easy way to solve that obstacle is to simply grant you a full license and make things official. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. They also want to capitalize on your triumphal appearance and market you as a new rising star, Hawks explained. The public is already loving you, so turning you into a pro-hero will be a boost to your credibility and will make the Hero Public Safety Commission look good. Which is something they desperately need. Mara shrugged but didn't deny it. Izuku was still speechless. He looked at Ochako like she had the answers to all of his questions, but she seemed to be as shocked as he was. But, I didn't pass any exam. He finally said. Technically speaking, the ability to grant a hero license is entirely at the discretion of the commission. The exams are only there as a formality to give us a framework to test newcomers and make sure they're ready and have what it takes to be a hero. If you think about it, it would be a real nightmare and a waste of time to make heroes like Hawks, Best Jeanist, or Edgeshot retake their exams every time their license expires. We know they're good at what they're doing, so we grant them a new one as soon as they pay their taxes, which you won't have to pay for your first year. By the way, that will be taken care of for you. You got above average grades on your provisional hero license exam, so it's not like it comes out of nowhere. Oh, and you also were recorded live defeating the greatest villain of all time, one that not even All Might was able to truly get out of the picture. So yeah, we don't expect much blowback from that decision. Does that mean that you're a hero? Yes. Congratulations. We used the name you picked for your provisional hero license, so you're legally registered as Deku. Feel free to rebrand yourself if you want. Ochako let out a high-pitched squeal and hugged him. Oh my god, Deku. You did it. You're a hero. An actual hero, with license and all. This is incredible. You deserve it so much. I'm so happy for you. She certainly let him know just how excited she was for him, apparently forgetting that his ribs were bruised. He didn't mind though. He was still trying to process this new information, but as the news sank in, his face lit up. He was a hero. After dreaming about it since he was 3 years old, if not earlier, he had made it. It was crazy to think that 2.5 years ago he was but a quirkless boy, and now here he was, being recognized as a hero. All his trouble, all the effort, pain, blood, sweat, and tears he'd invested so far to make this happen, it was all being rewarded. He started to tear up. This was almost as incredible to him as the time he got his admission letter too. He went stiff and all the happiness left his face. Ochako sensed his change of demeanor and quickly gave him space. Deku. He looked at her for a second, and then back at Mara. Does this mean I won't be able to come back to UA? His words hit Ochako like a punch in the gut. She opened and closed her mouth, turning her attention to the representative of the HPSC. He scratched his chin and let out a small yawn he didn't even bother covering. Well, technically, you still need to finish your high school education and get your diploma before you can even apply to be a sidekick, so once the school reopens its doors, you may want to go back to it. Both Izuku and Ochako sighed in relief. Best Jeanist, Hawks, and Gran Torino all exchanged knowing looks at the youngsters' reactions. Besides, it's the baseline educational requirement if you want to open your own hero agency, Mara commented nonchalantly, which is what you're probably gonna be spending the hero compensation grant the government is giving you. Wait, what? Izuku asked. Compensation what? Chief Suragame coughed on his fist, and took over the explanation, while Mara sighed and rubbed his eyes. Well, as you know, besides private sponsors and their licensing deals, heroes get economic compensation from the government and the HPSC based on their ranking in the Hero Billboard chart and specific high-profile cases they manage to solve. Woof. To make sure their agencies can stay afloat, they can pay their employees and continue to serve the public. After your astonishing victory today, the government is preparing an exemplary grant, enough to give you a fair head start in making your own hero agency. My own hero agency, he said, jolting up before feeling the pain in his chest. But I can't. How'd I even? Shouldn't I start as a sidekick somewhere? I mean, I'd be more than happy to take you in for a few years if you want to gain some experience in the field, Hawks said, but to be fair, you've been doing actual hero work for a while now, you know the ropes. You're more than capable of making your own agency, start low key, and then progressively get involved in bigger cases on your own. You would only need to hire someone to help you with your branding, a few accountants, secretaries, people to handle all the boring paperwork for you so you can focus on doing some harrowing. This was a lot for Izuku to take in. Getting a license was already unexpectedly fulfilling his dreams, but being told that he may be ready to start his agency. That was such a big deal. He had always pictured himself as a sidekick for the first, decade or so of his heroic career. Maybe less if he turned out to be great and found some sponsors. But right off high school. That was insane. So, the government will give him money to make his own hero agency? Ochako asked. That's a lot. Oh, yeah, the final numbers aren't in yet obviously, but I think they sent me an estimate, Maris said, taking out his phone and scrolling a bit. Ah, yes, here's what's currently being talked about. He turned his phone around to show them the screen. Both Izuku and Ochako's jaws dropped. That's a lot of zeros. She muttered. Mara turned his phone again with a quizzical look. Oh, wait, sorry. The picture was cropped. He then flipped his phone horizontally, allowing the screen to fit the actual full number. Izuku nearly fainted, and Ochako's grip almost left a mark on his stretcher's rails. That's too many zeros. He stuttered, his face redder than it had ever been. Ochako was almost in a catatonic state next to him, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Hawks leaned in to take a look and let out a whistle before giving Yokumiru Mera a questioning look. You guys are really pushing him to be a public figure, aren't you? Mera sighed, pocketing his phone away. I'm trying to be transparent here, Midoriya. The people have lost their faith in heroes for a while. After All Might, no one's been able to fill in his shoes right, and after so many incidents and revelations about our hero society, the ideal image of heroes has been tainted in the public eyes. Not to mention the rise in villainous activity. The dire tone of his voice and the content of his speech took Izuku and Ochako out of their stupor and were now listening carefully. He was especially focused now, with a growing sense of dread spreading in his stomach. He could tell where this was going. Not even Endeavor's sacrifice to allow the three of you to escape from All for One a week ago was able to fully redeem him in the eyes of the public. The old guard of heroes still has a lot to do before they're forgiven for their sins. But then, out of nowhere, you appear in the scene. A young boy that, and by now this is something the press has figured out, was trained by All Might himself. A boy some may remember from the sports festival is a revelation, a promising hero in training. By now, I'm sure they've found out about your involvement in the capturing of the hero killer Stain, which, by the way, we should probably tell the truth about. In any case, they'll learn that you were also part of the Shihasaikai raid. The exact reports of who defeated Kai Chisaki have been kept secret, but I believe Yukyu's statement mentions a student hero, so you can count on that being figured out as well. There are videos of you fighting alongside Endeavor and other pro heroes against Tamura Shigaraki a few months ago. And now, they've seen you defeat All for One, smiling and standing just like All Might would have. He leaned back on his chair and gave him a tired smile, brushing his bangs off his forehead. I don't mean to make this harder for you, and I know it's a lot to take in at once, but you're the rising star this society needs right now, he said with unsuspected sincerity. A warm sunrise after the darkest of nights. Chosen by All Might himself. There isn't a better pitch for a new inspirational figure to bring people's hope back into the hero society. The fact that you've already captured dangerous villains like Muscular and Moonfish can't be overlooked either. As of right now, the only high-profile villain that remains to be brought back to Tartarus is the hero killer, but he hasn't made a single move since he escaped. All in all, the situation seems to have improved beyond our most optimistic expectations, and you're the face of it, you're the hero we need, Midoriya Izuku. Please, help us bring hope back to our society. And then, both Yokumiru Mera and Kenki Saragame stood up with their arms to the sides of their body and bowed until their torsos were almost parallel to the floor. Izuku knew he had a bad habit of crying in public. Probably not what people wanted or expected from a hero. Certainly not how he wanted to present himself in front of the two top heroes, one of his mentors, his best friend, and two members of the government that were telling him that he needed to step in as the symbol of peace. Exactly what All Might wanted him to do, the reason why he was chosen as his successor. The whole point of his training and all the obstacles he had crossed was to reach this point, to ready himself and fulfill his dream of becoming the next symbol of peace. Someone strong enough to save everyone without having them worry. Someone that could give them the hope and security that All Might always gave him. He could be the one hero on a video that even a young, quirkless child may watch over and over again, thinking to themselves that that's who they wanted to be when they grew up. He couldn't think of it and not get emotional. As much as he tried, heavy tears fell from his eyes, staining what little was left of his ragged hero costume and the small bandages the paramedics had applied to him. He covered his face with an arm, the pain striking him again, but he needed to save some dignity. He didn't complain, however, when Ochako gave him a side hug, letting him rest his head against her shoulder, patting his back, and gently stroking his hair. It's okay, Deku, she told him, and even though he couldn't see her face, she sounded like she was ready to cry as well. I know it's a lot of pressure we're putting onto you, Mara said, sounding slightly uncomfortable. No child should bear this responsibility. We understand you need time for yourself and to process everything that's going on. Izuku tried his best to control himself, but he was still an emotional mess. Everything was affecting him. The pain, the exhaustion, knowing he'd defeated All for One, the reunion with his friends, becoming an official hero, getting more money than he knew was possible to have, being told that it was his time to own up his status as the symbol of peace. His mind was trying to make sense of everything at once, and he could almost feel the steam coming out of his ears. He needed to stay strong, however. He needed to be focused on what needed to be done. He lowered his arm, revealing his puffy, red eyes, and his trembling lips, but trying his best to keep the conversation going. I'm sorry. No need to apologize, young man, Saragame said. We should be the ones apologizing for relying so much on you. You are, of course, more than free to refuse our proposals. You can focus on your studies and stay out of the public sphere. Woof. If that's what you want, we can help you by keeping the press somewhat away from you, though we can't promise much. And no, he had to swallow the knot in his throat. All Might. He wanted this from me. He told me I needed to step up as the next symbol of peace. To show the world that heroes are still standing strong. This is everything I ever fought for. I'm ready to do it. His still crying face was probably not conveying much security, but no one in the room seemed to care. Ochako was still hugging him. Best Jeanist and Hawks were nodding sympathetically, and Izuku could see a proud sparkle in Gran Torino's eyes. Mara and Saragame nodded at him before sitting down once again. Well, if that's the case, then we want to suggest one last thing before we wrap this up and leave you to rest for the day, Mara said. The president of the Hero Public Safety Commission will hold a press conference in about 2 hours to make the announcement of your hero license, the government grant, and to make some general statements regarding the events that happened today. However, she will make a point to avoid giving details about you and the reasons why you were involved in the first place. Izuku nodded. We believe it's up to you to share as much as you feel comfortable without us getting into the details of your life. However, the public is looking forward to learning about you. And we do believe that it's important for the audience to know their heroes. So we would like to ask you to give an interview where you can present yourself to the world. It doesn't have to be long, you don't have to get into many details, but people want to hear from you. Your voice, your story. They're dying to know the kind of person you are. Would you be comfortable with that? He managed to push every other thought away as he considered that proposition. He wasn't the best at talking in public. He always got anxious and worried that he would mispronounce a word, or say the wrong thing, or embarrass himself. However, it made sense from the perspective of the Hero Public Safety Commission and their idea of setting him up as the new symbol of peace. Doing hero work and protecting people was the most important part of the job, but to earn their trust he needed to also look and play the part of someone they could rely on. All Might's interviews had always been a big reason why people loved him. It made him feel relatable, trustworthy, it grounded him and made him a likable character. It was the same as patrolling. It wasn't something heroes did just to look for crime. It was also a way of showing themselves to the population and making their relationship with those they protect closer and more personal. He wasn't confident in his speaking skills, but he assumed he could do a good enough job too. Deku, Ochako said, softly shaking his shoulder to get him out of his trance. He looked at her and saw that she had an apologetic look on her face. You were muttering again. He looked at the other pro-heroes and adults in the room, and they all were staring at him with wide eyes. He felt himself go red once again. I can do it, he finally said, clearing his throat. I can deal with that. Mara nodded. Perfect. It doesn't have to be a press conference. We can pick one reporter to make a short, personal interview with you. We can ask them to give you a list of pre-selected questions if you want. I don't know. If I know what the questions will be beforehand, I'll probably overthink the answers. All Might was always so spontaneous, right? I think that would be better. People will need to know the real me, the authentic Deku. Even, even if I'm. He struggled to find the right word. Kind of a dork, Ochako suggested, earning an embarrassed look from Izuku. She chuckled. I think you're right, Deku. People need to see the real you. And I'm sure they're all gonna love you. He felt like dying. He wasn't someone people would love, right? He was so bland and plain looking, and there was nothing special about him. Very well, if that's what you want. So, do you have any preference on who conducts the interview? Any journalist you know or that you're familiar with. The interview will be broadcasted on all channels, so don't worry about choosing a signal. You can pick literally anyone. You're the most wanted guest in the country right now, so they'll say yes, and people are gonna watch you even if your aunt is interviewing you. Try not to pick your aunt, though. Izuku stopped to think for a second. Truth be told, even though he tried to keep up with the news, he wasn't very familiar with TV journalists. He knew some by name, and a few others he could recognize if they showed him a picture of their faces, but he didn't have any preference. He'd never been close to any journalist that he could think. Oh, it suddenly hit him. Ah, does it have to be someone from TV? He asked. Can it be someone from a newspaper? It can be anyone you feel comfortable with. He was about to make his suggestion, but there was some screaming coming from the hallway. It sounded like a stampede, and they all turned when they heard Death Arms trying to stop someone. Mara's phone buzzed, and he took it out to read a text. Oh, right. Well, Midoriya, I'll tell the president that she can announce that you'll be giving an interview in the next couple of days. That'll keep the media busy for now. I thank you for your time and your cooperation. We'll come back tomorrow to keep working out the details of how we're gonna be moving forward. The ruckus outside of the room was increasing in volume. Izuku and Ochako exchanged worried looks. What's going on? He asked. Mara and Saragame stood up and walked towards the door. The employee of the HPSC grinned and put a hand on the doorknob. You have visitors, he simply said, before opening the door. And then, with a speed that would make the Iida family jealous, Inko Midoriya ran straight into Izuku's arms. Where stories live. Discover now.